Let me tell you how it was. I don't care who describes that to you. Nobody can tell it any worse than what it was. And no one exaggerates that. There is no way for it to be exaggerated. It was that bad.
It was a decade-long natural catastrophe of biblical proportions, when the skies refused their rains, when plagues of grasshoppers and swarms of rabbits descended on parched fields, when bewildered families huddled in darkened rooms while angry winds shook their homes. Pillars of dust choked out the midday sun, and the land itself, the soil they had depended upon for their survival and counted on for their prosperity, turned against them with a lethal vengeance.
When the man would lose the farm, lose the house, there was often a huge change in his personality, in his point of view, in his participation level, in society, in his community, and especially within his family. There were many, many cases of men going into severe depression, seeking escape in alcoholism, seeking escape in leaving the family and leaving the wife to fend for herself, trying to clothe the children, trying to put food on the table, trying to find some way to make a living.
None of the calamity periods compare from the standpoint of financial loss, long-lasting distress, suffering, and discouragement with the decades of the 1930s. The Great Depression, which began in the fall of 1929, affected Kansas just as it did every other part of the country. But on top of it, there was superimposed almost a decade of drought and dust storms. In other words, Kansas and the neighboring Great Plains states got a double dose of misery and calamity. Congressman Clifford R. Hope.
When they first hit, it just looked like a mountain caving in on you. You couldn't see anything. It was as dark as night. It was tough. It was bad. It just kind of like the world coming to an end. Because daylight, when it's 12 o'clock noon, it was black outdoors, as dark as it could be.
You could see it coming. It was just like a wall. You would look out and you'd see this wall of dust. So you got where you were going or whatever, because you knew it was coming.
Well, it was back in the early 30s, as I recall. And I can still see in my mind those clouds coming in from the west. It looked like, today it looked like heavy rain clouds, but they were just dark clouds of dust that moved along and just settled everywhere.
It was tough. It was bad. It just kind of like the world coming to an end.
They always talk about the dust, but I said it was the dirty 30s. It was dirt.
The worst year was 1935, when there were 53 major dust storms. The stress on people was tremendous.
My father, I don't know that he became an alcoholic, but he, like other men who lost everything, began to drink. And I thought about that a lot because I've written some books about my area, at the number of people, men, who drank and who later quit, which told me they weren't really alcoholics, but it was a way to escape the humiliation of losing everything. That must have been terrible. I was so little it didn't affect me that way, but I know my father was always humiliated by that.
If you have dust storms lasting 3 or 4 days continuously, lifting the rafters of the ceiling of the roof, for example, what does that do to individuals? What does it do to folks who are religiously oriented and perhaps see this as signs of God's displeasure? What can one do to rectify one's relationship with one's God? And I'm sure that, that the psychological and religious implications were significant as well for many folks.
I remember, and I don't know of anyone that had this dust pneumonia, but there was this illness caused by the dust that settled in, would get into the lungs, and if you breathed enough of it, you'd have kind of a pneumonia condition. And I'm sure that there were people that were seriously ill with it.
And in 1938, there was 3 or 4 deaths that they always said was the cause from dust pneumonia.
A lot of people did wear masks, whether my mother remembers it or not. Her mother made her wear a mask, and her sisters also recall being made to wear a mask to avoid that Oklahoma red dust. So even in Nebraska, people blamed Oklahoma for the Dust Bowl. But yes, masks were common fare. You wore them when you went out, you wore them when you were in the garden, when you were on the way to church, when you're on the way to school. It was just a health precaution.
Most farmers, when they decide to leave their farms, load their household possessions in trucks or trailers and take to the highway under power. Many of the townspeople, having no means of transport, are forced to abandon their property and leave on foot, with only the clothes on their backs and such bundles as may be carried in their hands. After every storm, the highways are thronged with these refugees. On the roads running through Meade and Montezuma, I have seen hundreds of people in endless procession, heading out of the Dust Bowl. So it was in 1934, in 1935, in 1936, in 1937, and in 1938. Thousands of families deserting towns and farms, all seeking some haven of relief from the dust.